My name is Sarah Johnson, and I am an architect. 6 months ago, my identical twin sister convinced the world I was insane so she could steal my life. She didn't just lie, she executed a surgical strike on my identity. She had me committed. She drained my accounts. She convinced my own parents that I'd had a violent psychotic break. For half a year, I was a ghost in a hospital gown. Then this morning, I stood in the shadows of the St. Jude's Cathedral, watching a woman with my face walk down the aisle toward my fiancé. As the priest reached the part about lawful impediment, the groom didn't wait for a guest to speak. He stepped back, looked the woman in my Vera Wang dress straight in the eye, and whispered a name that wasn't mine. Before we get into the details of how a sisterhood became a crime scene, please take a moment to like and subscribe. But only if you've ever felt the sting of a family betrayal that no one else believed. And drop your city and current time in the comments. I'm reading through them, and I want to see how far this warning travels. Now, let me take you back to a rainy Tuesday in Seattle, to the front door of my townhouse, and the moment I made the mistake of letting a predator back into my home because she shared my DNA. I was standing in the center of my living room, sunlight catching the 3-carat diamond on my left hand, feeling like I'd finally won at life. I had just been named senior partner at my architecture firm, and the wedding was only 4 months away. My life was a series of clean lines and solid foundations. Then, the doorbell rang. Standing on my porch was Jade. We share the same amber eyes and the same high cheekbones, but that day, she looked like a blurred, charcoal sketch of me. Her hair was matted, her coat was thin, and her eyes were rimmed with the kind of desperation that usually precedes a request for money. She told me she was homeless. She told me she was finally clean and just needed a place to breathe. Mark, my fiancé, was wary from the second he saw her. "Sarah, I know she's your sister," he whispered in the kitchen, "but she's a hurricane. You're just getting your life where you want it. Don't let her blow the roof off." But I had that old, familiar ache, the pathological need to be the bridge that held our family together. I told him it would be different this time. I gave her the keys, the guest suite, and my spare MacBook. I gave her the blueprint to my existence. The merging started so subtly I almost missed it. It began with a scent. I walked into the bathroom one morning to find the air thick with my signature sandalwood perfume. Jade was standing at the mirror, dabbing it onto her wrists. She laughed, a sound that was a perfect octave of my own. "It just smells so much like home, Sarah. I hope you don't mind." A week later, I found her sitting in my home office, her fingers dancing across my laptop. I saw my work email open on the screen. "Jade, what are you doing?" I asked, my heart doing a strange, heavy skip. "Oh, some guy named Mr. Henderson emailed you about the blueprints for the pier," she said, spinning the chair around with a playful grin. I sent a quick reply saying you'd get back to him. I signed it S. Johnson. I mean, who could tell the difference, right? I'm just helping. She wasn't helping. She was practicing. She started wearing my clothes, not the trendy things she used to like, but my structured blazers and sensible heels. I'd catch her watching me across the dinner table, her eyes tracking the way I held my fork, the way I tucked my hair behind my right ear when I was nervous, the way I laughed at Mark's jokes. She wasn't just living in my house, she was studying for a role. And like a fool, I kept the door wide open, never realizing that while I was trying to save her life, she was busy becoming me. By the second month, the foundation of my life didn't just crack, it began to liquefy. It started with a phone call from my bank's fraud department asking about a $20,000 wire transfer to an offshore account. When I checked my records, the confirmation email wasn't there. I found it 30 minutes later in my trash folder, alongside a dozen other threads I'd never read. At work, the atmosphere turned Arctic. My boss, a man who had mentored me for a decade, called me into his office with a look of profound disappointment. He showed me a series of emails sent from my account at 3 a.m. rambling, incoherent rants questioning his leadership and accusing our biggest client of embezzlement. I stood there, my mouth opening and closing, realizing that while I had been sleeping, Jade had been a ghost at my desk, dismantling my career one keystroke at a time. "Sarah, you need help," Jade whispered that evening, her hand resting on my shoulder with a terrifying, cool tenderness. She had invited our parents over without telling me. You're forgetting things, honey. The money, the emails. Mom, Dad, I'm scared for her. I snapped. I screamed that she was a parasite, that she was stealing from me, but Jade didn't scream back. She just shrank into the sofa, her bottom lip trembling, looking like a wounded bird. My father looked at me with a coldness that froze my blood. Look at yourself, Sarah. You're hysterical. Jade has been nothing but supportive while you've been unraveling. The incident happened 3 nights later. Mark was away on a business trip, a detail Jade had confirmed by checking my calendar. I walked into the kitchen to find her standing by the island, holding my favorite paring knife. She wasn't pointing it at me, she was pointing it at herself. What are you doing? I gasped. Jade looked at me and smiled, a jagged, terrifying expression I will never forget. I'm making sure they never believe you again. She let out a blood-curdling shriek and sliced her own forearm, then dropped the knife at my feet just as the front door burst open. She had called 911 minutes before, timing the police arrival to the exact second. When the officers stormed in, they saw Jade bleeding and sobbing on the floor and me, standing over her with the knife at my toes, looking exactly like the monster she'd spent weeks telling everyone I was. As the paramedics strapped me onto a gurney, my mother was already there, holding Jade, stroking her hair. It's okay, Jade, she cooed, not even glancing at me as they rolled me past. You're safe now. We're here. I screamed that I was Sarah, that I was the one who belonged there, but the sedative hit my vein before I could finish. As my vision blurred, I saw Jade look up from my mother's shoulder. She didn't have a single tear in her eye. She just winked. The walls of the psychiatric ward were a relentless, sterile white, designed to neutralize any spark of identity. For 2 weeks, I was poked, prodded, and spoke to doctors who looked at me with clinical pity every time I insisted I was the real Sarah Johnson. To them, my truth was just a symptom of my breakdown. My parents didn't come. They were too busy helping the recovering Sarah, Jade, pick out floral arrangements for the wedding that was still, somehow, on schedule. I was sitting in the common room, my hands shaking from the side effects of medication I didn't need, when Mark was finally allowed to visit. My heart leaped, but as he sat across from me, his face was a mask of cold iron. He didn't reach for my hand. He didn't offer a smile. To anyone watching, he looked like a man disgusted by a fiancé who had lost her mind. The wedding is in 3 days, he said, his voice flat and loud enough for the orderly nearby to hear. Jade is handling everything. She's been a rock, Sarah. I don't know what we would have done without her. The words felt like a physical blow. I opened my mouth to beg him to look at me, to see the woman he loved, when I noticed his wrist. Mark was wearing a heavy, vintage silver watch, the one I'd tracked down for his 30th birthday. It was a beautiful piece, but it was purely functional for him. Mark was a forensic accountant, and he had a peculiar, private ritual. He only wore that specific watch when he was working a case. He called it his truth teller because it never lost a second. My breath hitched. Mark never wore that watch on dates. He never wore it to dinner. He wore it when he was hunting for missing millions, looking for the one lie that would bring down a corporate empire. He leaned in closer, his shadow falling over me. His eyes remained icy, but he adjusted the cuff of his shirt, making sure the watch face glinted in the fluorescent light. I'm going through the accounts, Sarah. I'm finding everything you misplaced. I'm going to make sure every single debt is settled by the time we stand at that altar. He wasn't talking about my bank accounts. He was talking about the wire transfers Jade had made. He was talking about the digital breadcrumbs she'd left behind while pretending to be me. He wasn't fooled. He was playing the long game, treating my life like a crime scene and Jade like the target of a federal investigation. He stood up to leave without a goodbye kiss, but for the first time in 14 days, the fog in my head cleared. I wasn't alone. Jade thought she was marrying a meal ticket, but she was actually walking into a trap set by the best hunter I knew. I just had to survive 3 more days of silence. The heavy oak doors of the cathedral creaked open just as the organ music reached its crescendo. I slipped into the back pew, cloaked in a heavy shawl, my heart hammering against my ribs. Up at the altar, the scene was a masterpiece of stolen beauty. Jade stood in my ivory lace, her back to the congregation, looking like the picture of bridal grace. My parents sat in the front row, dabbing their eyes, utterly convinced they were watching their troubled daughter finally find peace. Jade took Mark's hands, her voice a soft, practiced tremolo as she began her vows. She spoke of second chances and the strength of love, using the exact words I had written in my journal months ago. She was seconds away from the finish line, from legally becoming me and claiming the life I had built. "And do you, Mark, take this woman," the priest began. "Stop." The word wasn't a shout, but it carried the weight of a gavel. Mark let go of Jade's hands and stepped back. The congregation gasped, a ripple of confusion turning into a deafening silence. Jade let out a small, confused laugh, the mask of my face beginning to twitch. "Mark? Darling, what is it?" "You're a beautiful bride, Jade," Mark said, his voice echoing off the vaulted ceiling. "But you made one mistake. You studied Sarah's mind, but you didn't know her body as well as I do." He reached out and sharply tugged the lace sleeve of the gown down over her left shoulder. There, stark against her pale skin, was a tiny, faded ink flower, a souvenir from a rebellious summer Jade had spent in Bali years ago. "Sarah has never had a tattoo," Mark said, his eyes flashing with a cold, righteous fury. "She spent $2,000 on laser removal for a birthmark because she hates imperfections. But you? You kept your secrets hidden under my fiancé's clothes." Jade stumbled back, her face contorting. It's me." "Mark, she's in the hospital. She's sick." "No," Mark interrupted, pulling a remote from his pocket. "You're the one who's sick." The church's massive projector screens, usually reserved for hymn lyrics, suddenly flickered to life. It wasn't a slideshow of memories. It was a crystal-clear audio video recording from the guest suite. It was Jade, sitting at my desk 3 nights ago, laughing into her phone as she bragged to one of her old creditors. "She's locked away for good this time," her voice rang out, chillingly casual. "By the time Mark figures it out, the marriage license will be signed and the trust fund will be half empty. I'm Sarah now. I've always been the better version anyway." The scream that left my mother's throat was primal. Before Jade could even gather her train, the side doors of the sanctuary burst open. 4 uniformed officers marched down the aisle, the silver of their handcuffs glinting under the stained glass. Mark didn't look at the police. He looked past the chaos, past the sobbing parents and the arrested bride, straight to the back of the room where I stood. He didn't have to say a word. The watch on his wrist caught the light, and I knew the case was closed. The silence that followed the siren's fade was heavier than the chaos that preceded it. Jade had been led out in my ivory gown, the lace torn and the veil dragging on the church carpet, a fallen queen of a kingdom built on sand. She was facing a litany of charges: identity theft, grand larceny, and felony fraud. But as the pews cleared and the guests whispered their way to the exits, the real trial began in the foyer. My parents approached me like I was a ticking bomb. My mother's face was a ruin of mascara and shame, her hands reaching out, trembling, before dropping to her sides when she saw the expression on my face. "Sarah, baby," my father began, his voice cracking with a hollow, desperate grief. "We were just so worried. She was so convincing. You have to understand, we couldn't tell the difference. We thought we were helping you." I looked at them, really looked at them, and realized that the responsible daughter I had spent 30 years being was just a role they had cast me in to make their lives easier. They hadn't seen me. They had seen a function. "You couldn't tell the difference?" I asked, my voice terrifyingly calm. "She has a tattoo. She drinks her coffee black, and I've used cream since I was 6. She looked into your eyes for 6 months and told you I was a danger to myself, and you didn't once come to the facility to check if I was still in there. We were blinded by the pain," my mother sobbed. "Please, Sarah. We're your family." "No," I said, stepping back into the light of the open cathedral doors. "Family is the person who notices the one thing that doesn't belong. Family is the person who wears a watch because they're working a case for your soul. If you can't tell the difference between the daughter who built this life and the one who tried to burn it down, then you don't need the real one in yours. I walked away from their apologies, leaving them standing in the wreckage of a wedding that was never theirs to witness. Mark was waiting by the car, the engine idling, the truth teller still ticking on his wrist. He didn't ask if I was okay. He knew I was finally becoming more than okay. 2 weeks later, we stood on a rugged cliffside in Big Sur. There were no Vera Wang gowns, number 47-person guest lists, and no shadows of a sisterhood that had nearly cost me my mind. It was just us, a witness, and the sound of the Pacific crashing against the rocks. When the officiant asked for my name, I didn't hesitate. I said it clearly, firmly, letting the salt air carry the sound of a woman who finally owned every syllable of her own story. I am Sarah Johnson. And for the first time in my life, I am the only one. The moral and educational value of Sarah's journey serves as a powerful blueprint for navigating the complexities of trust, the weight of family loyalty, and the necessity of self-preservation. This story offers 3 critical lessons for anyone building a life in a world where appearances can be deceiving. The fallacy of biological loyalty. The primary moral of this story is that DNA is not a license for destruction. For years, Sarah operated under the responsible one trap, believing that her success was a communal pool from which her sister could draw without limit. The educational takeaway is the importance of discerning between a mistake and a pattern. Sarah's pathological empathy blinded her to the fact that Jade wasn't looking for a hand up, but a life to inhabit. The story teaches us that true family is defined by those who see us clearly and protect our well-being, not merely those who share our blood. The power of observational love. Mark's role in the narrative highlights a profound educational truth. Real love is rooted in the details. While the parents, who claimed to love Sarah for 30 years, failed to see through a shallow imitation, Mark's love was investigative and precise. He knew the blueprint of Sarah's soul, from her coffee preferences to the absence of a tattoo. This teaches us that the strongest relationships are built on consistency and observation. If someone truly loves you, they cannot be easily tricked by a carbon copy. They recognize the frequency of your spirit, not just the shape of your face. Architecture as self-ownership. Finally, Sarah's transformation from giver to gatekeeper provides a vital lesson in personal boundaries. By the end of the story, Sarah realizes that forgiveness without change is simply permission for further abuse. Her refusal to accept her parents' excuses is not an act of cruelty, but one of emotional architecture. She learns that you cannot build a stable future on a foundation of enabling and lies. The story concludes with the ultimate moral: the most important person to be seen by is yourself. Once Sarah reclaimed her own identity, she no longer needed the validation of a family that was willing to trade her for a comfortable lie. The final image of the fur plates from the reference story is replaced here by this single voice on a cliffside. It reminds us that while it is a tragedy to lose your family, it is a greater tragedy to lose yourself while trying to keep them.